We begin with breaking news tonight. The man police say intentionally set a raging California wildfire has just been charged with felony arson. He made his first court appearance just a short time ago. Investigators say Ronnie Dean Stout started the park fire by pushing a burning car into a ravine last week in the city of Chico, which is about 90 minutes outside Sacramento. The fire has since burned nearly 370,000 acres, quickly becoming California's sixth largest fire in recorded history. Firefighters say it is only 12% contained at this time. Some evacuation orders were lifted, but many people returning to their homes found scenes of total devastation and the uncertainty of what comes next.
Now we will create a new life in another place, and we will try to hold on to the joys and the memories and the good things for this place.
Steve joins me now from Butte County, California. Steve, some really heartbreaking scenes out there of that devastation. But I want to begin with that breaking news. These are serious charges this suspect is facing. What did we learn in court today?
Yeah, they are. 42-year-old Ronnie Dean Stout II in front of a judge this afternoon. We just learned moments ago that Stout will face criminal arson charges. We don't know exactly what those charges are going to be. The arraignment now set for Thursday, although he did appear briefly today. So we'll learn more about the guidelines. What we're looking for is essentially, is he guilty of recklessly committing the arson? Is he suspected of that? Or is he suspected of intentionally committing arson? Those two things will determine the sentencing guideline and the severity of the charges. He's accused, essentially, witnesses say, of putting something in a car, leaving the car lights on fire, and he pushes it in a ravine, essentially, according to witnesses, sparking a fire now the size of a large American city. Valerie?
How about firefighters? Have they been able to make any progress on the fire itself?
They have. You know, over the last 3-4, I would say, days or so, the weather has significantly cooled down. Cooler temperatures means essentially less fire danger. They were able to make progress. That's why there's any containment on this fire whatsoever. It is now 12% contained for a 360,000-acre fire. It doesn't seem like much, but any progress is good progress when you're talking about a fire that has moved this quickly and moved on multiple fronts, confounding firefighters in some cases because of just the number of spot fires that were shooting off, almost generating its own weather system at certain points. The fire now more pushed off into the wilderness, away from community centers. That is always the primary mission of firefighters. But as I speak, it's gotten significantly hotter. It's going to get significantly more windy and much more dry over the next few days, all raising the fire danger. What's already a very dangerous firefight. Valerie?
And Steve, I want to talk about one of the homeowners that you interviewed. This is the second time this has happened to him?
Yeah, I'm actually standing in what would be part of his driveway. If you can see all the destruction behind me. This is a man that lost his home in the fire in Paradise in 2018, the Camp Fire, deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history, and then bought this home as what he called a silver lining. He still wanted to stay in this extremely fire-prone area of Butte County and thought he could by essentially building some defensible space for this home. And then a few days, a few days ago, this home burns to the ground. It's hard to even talk about it. I get choked up because of how emotional he was. He lost his cat that he rescued from the first fire, and we believe has died in this fire. Here he is in his own words. Listen.
Third time's the charm, maybe, for our future. And, yeah.
Is it hard because you thought of this as your silver lining? Huh?
Yes. I figured this was a house they would be wheeling me out of in my old age, and we'd be taking in sunsets.
It's difficult stuff, and that is sort of what we've heard from many residents in this area. There is a collective trauma because of the amount of fire that are sparked off in this specific part of California. It is very, tough to hear those stories because of how much you hear those stories. A lot of people have moved away, but a lot of people say they want to stick it out because this is home. Valerie?
Steve, so heartbreaking to hear those stories. Thank you for that reporting. Bill Cairns joins me now. Bill, what is the news on the forecast front for Northern California?
Yeah, Valerie, if you notice behind Steve, the trees weren't really blowing. It was obviously sunny. It's still dry, and it's going to stay dry in California for a long time. But it's not windy. And so that's really helped out the firefighting efforts over the last couple of days after the incredible spreads that we had over the weekend. Notice, the fire started here just north of Chico. Right now, winds are 15, Red Bluff 10. This is the area that is roughly burned, in between all these major cities. And as far as what we've been dealing with today with the actual visible imagery showing you, we can see that the fire has not been rapidly spreading, but there is still, these are the smoke plumes. This is our visible satellite imagery showing you where the active fire fronts are, and this is the smoke from it that burned all this region. And so it's what we call the Eastern Front, and this is a lot of areas that haven't burned in over 100 years. So there's plenty of stuff to burn in the days and even weeks ahead. Very rugged terrain, too. It's not near a lot of cities or towns, very rural. So they made us have to just let that burn, and hopefully we'll get some rain eventually help put the fire out. Now, as far as other conditions go, because that's not the only fire, there's lots of other fires going on in the west. Red flag warnings are in effect for Wyoming, portions of Idaho and Utah. So this is where it's a little windier. And because of all these fires that are burning, air quality has been a big problem. And even in the east, even as far east as Cape Cod over the weekend, there was some smoke that blew all the way across the country. The worst of the air quality now, Northern California. This is associated with the Park Fire. And then these areas to the north here, especially in Oregon, Idaho, and into Montana. The air quality problems earlier today was hazardous in Susanville. Now it's now it's considered in the red, which is unhealthy. A bunch of other areas like Bend and Boise, also the air is considered unhealthy right now. And it'll be similar for the days ahead. And when we add up all the fires in our lower 48 right now, it's 102 large fires, a small army, 27,000 firefighters are on these blazes. And we have evacuations, not just on the Park Fire, but on 24 other fires also. We've had evacuations that have taken place, even a new one today in areas of Colorado. And the fire, all that smoke, later tonight, this is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, pretty dense over areas of Montana, southern Idaho, South Dakota, North Dakota, heading into areas of Minnesota, Minneapolis, Des Moines, and Chicago. Your sunrise tomorrow morning, you will notice that smoke in the air. So how do we set up? A lot of people were asking, is this highly unusual? Well, this unfortunately has become the norm. 2022 was at this time, we'd already burned 5 million acres. We just passed 4 million. So 2 of the last 3 years were incredibly active. What was unusual was last year at this point, we'd only burned 1 million. Last year, we didn't have hardly any fires form, but now we're well above average. And you notice that in 2021 and 2019, kind of similar to this year. So this isn't extraordinary. This has become the norm. If anything, last year was the year that was highly unusual, Valerie, because we just didn't have a lot of fires burning across the country.
All right, Bill, thanks for the update. We are less than 100 days until the November presidential election and should find out who Kamala Harris's running mate will be within the next week or so, at least according to her campaign co-chair, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who said today she imagines that will be the case. Both Governor Whitmer and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro were at a campaign rally in suburban Philadelphia today, making the case for Kamala Harris. And while Whitmer says she is not part of the vetting for the VP pick, Shapiro seemed like he was auditioning for the job.
I want a future that is cleaner and greener. I want a future with better schools and safer streets. And I want a future with more freedom, not less. And I want a future where I can look the 47th president of the United States in the eye and say, hello, Madam President. I hope you're with me. Let us get to work.
Okay, let's bring in NBC's Dasha Burns to break it down for us. Dasha, how was the energy at the rally there? Shapiro certainly was excited. Harris wasn't there herself, though, right?
Yeah, Valerie, I got to tell you, for 5 o'clock on a Monday in the doldrums of summer, the energy there was pretty darn electric. There were about more than 1,000 people at this event, and there were chants throughout the speeches of both Whitmer and Shapiro. The crowd was riled up. You can really feel a palpable shift on the Democratic side of the aisle since Harris has taken that role, has stepped into the top of the ticket. And you now have a second round of sweepstakes now on the Democratic side with, you heard there, Governor Josh Shapiro, one of the contenders among many others. She doesn't have a ton of time to make that decision, but certainly, Valerie, a real shift, a real jolt for the Democratic Party right now.
And when it does come to the sweepstakes, what are voters saying about that?
Well, look, in Pennsylvania, you got a lot of Josh Shapiro fans here, and there are a number of reasons why he could be a promising contender. Number one, Pennsylvania, and that's a big one because this truly is a critical state. There is no way to overstate just how important Pennsylvania is going to be in November, and he's really popular here. A recent Fox News poll had him at a 61% favorability rating. He's someone who has really branded himself as a bipartisan governor who can bring Democrats and Republicans together. So if Harris is looking for someone more moderate who can really speak to some of those swing voters, potentially moderate Republicans or conservative Democrats, then he could really have a leg up. But there are a lot of other contenders. And take a listen to some of what we heard from voters today.
I don't think we could go wrong with any of them. But, of course, Pennsylvania proud, and we love to see Josh Shapiro.
Definitely Josh Shapiro, our governor. We are very proud of him. We think he brings a lot to the table.
Still quite a list of contenders, though, among them Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the Illinois governor, Kentucky governor, a lot of governors, and not a lot of time to make that decision. Our reporting says that August 7th is the deadline for Democrats. We could learn as soon as next week, Valerie.
And Dasha, it also looks like Vice President Harris is closing that lead with Trump in some new polls. What do we know about those numbers?
Yeah, the race tightening up, Harris's favorability going up. Vance, who is, of course, the new running mate for former President Trump, his favorability not so great. So some tables and some tides turning in the aftermath of the Republican National Convention just leading up to the Democratic National Convention, where we will have a brand new ticket for the Democrats, Valerie.
All right, Dasha Burns on the ground for us in Pennsylvania. Dasha, thank you. And we have some breaking news, an update in the ongoing Democratic Veep stakes. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper has officially withdrawn from the competition, informing the Harris campaign that he does not want to be considered for the search. One source tells NBC News that Cooper does not want to be in the mix because he wants to run for the U.S. Senate in 2026. We'll bring you more as we have it. Before his time in politics, Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, spent a few years working in Silicon Valley, and today he returned to raise some money, hoping to tap into his powerful network of tech billionaires. CNBC's Kate Rooney has the latest.
The J.D. Vance fundraiser was just a few miles from here Monday night. This is the epicenter of tech and venture capital money, which has traditionally flowed to the left, but this year there are some high-profile donors opening their pocketbooks for the Trump-Vance ticket. According to an invitation seen by CNBC, Monday's event was hosted by cryptocurrency executive Mike Belshie. One executive that I did speak to who attended has been a registered Democrat for decades and plans to give to the GOP this year. Say it's a result of the Biden administration's crackdown on cryptocurrency, while Trump and Vance are openly embracing crypto. The SEC and Gary Gensler are the main complaints from the crypto crowd, but more broadly, there's a focus around the FTC and Lena Khan. So deal scrutiny is top of mind for venture capitalists out here. Plus, there's some focus on AI. And Vance is a familiar face in Silicon Valley. He was an investor for about 5 years. He worked for PayPal founder Peter Thiel before starting his own firm. And he's got close ties to David Sachs and Elon Musk, who have helped raise Vance's profile and rally other wealthy donors. Meanwhile, this is Kamala Harris's backyard. She was born here in the Bay Area. She's the former DA of San Francisco and California Attorney General. She's raised about $100 million thanks to some wealthy tech donors with endorsements from the other side of the so-called PayPal mafia, names like Reid Hoffman. Kate Rooney for CNBC Business News in Palo Alto.
The FBI says Donald Trump has agreed to talk to them about their investigation into the man who tried to kill him. The Bureau says this is all standard stuff, and they want Trump's perspective on what he observed that day. The FBI also says the purpose here is to try and nail down the shooter's motive, 20-year-old Thomas Crooks. What they know now is that he used a drone near the rally just hours before the shooting, and that he concealed a bunch of online gun purchases. And then there was this anecdote about what happened during the attack.
At approximately 6:11 p.m., a local police officer was boosted onto the roof by another officer where he encountered the subject. The subject pointed the rifle at him, and the officer immediately dropped to the ground. After approximately 25 to 30 seconds after this encounter, the subject fired 8 rounds before being successfully neutralized by United States Secret Service counter-sniper.
NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley has more on the investigation.
The FBI said on Monday that former President Donald Trump had agreed to sit down for a victim impact interview with the Bureau about the attempt on his life. The news came in an FBI briefing for reporters more than 2 weeks after the attack, a briefing that the FBI officials said they were holding to increase transparency during the investigation. The interview with Trump would be consistent with any interview the Bureau would conduct for a victim of crime under any circumstances, an official said. The FBI said their investigation has found that attempted assassin Thomas Matthew Crooks was a highly intelligent man, as well as a loner with few friends and acquaintances outside of his family, and had a growing interest in weapons. Crooks appeared to have carefully planned the attack ahead of the campaign rally and worked to keep his plans quiet. His motive is still not known, officials said, but the FBI has conducted hundreds of interviews and requested information about his online accounts, including gaming accounts from dozens of companies. An official said that Crooks's gaming accounts lacked recent activity and that any social contacts he had were dated. Crooks's search history included seeking information about the attempted assassination of the Slovak prime minister earlier this year, as well as information about mass shootings in power plants, an official said. Last week, the FBI revealed that Crooks had searched how far away was Oswald from Kennedy about the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy by Lee Harvey Oswald, about a week before the attack on Trump. Crooks fired off 8 rounds just 25 to 30 seconds after a local police officer attempted to confront him on the roof. As NBC News has previously reported, citing the FBI and local law enforcement, the officer was boosted up to the roof line by a colleague, and Crooks pointed his weapon at the officer just before firing. Trump was hit in the ear with either a bullet or a bullet fragment, the FBI said. FBI Deputy Director Paula Bates said Monday that the entirety of the FBI is committed to uncovering the real facts and the truth about the attack on former President Trump. Valerie?
All right, Ryan Riley, thank you. Don't go anywhere. We're just getting started. Up next, President Biden makes his first public remarks since he dropped out of the 2024 race, and he's taking on Supreme Court reform. Could this be the beginning of a harsher Biden with his final months in office? Plus, the results of the election in Venezuela are in, but both sides are claiming victory, how this is leading to violence in the country and what it means for the rest of the world. And later this hour, Olympic fencing. NBC's Gadi Schwartz takes a stab at the sport, and you're not going to want to miss it.
This is a 15-year-old? This is like a French warrior. All right, D'Artagnan. Allez. Halt. Good. Oh, my gosh. That is a lot harder than it looks.
Welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Protests and vigils were held across the country yesterday after activists declared it a national day of mourning for Sonia Massey. Massey, a black woman, was fatally shot by a white deputy in her Illinois home. The shooting was captured by another deputy's body camera. Earlier in the month, Deputy Sean Grayson was fired and charged with first-degree murder. He's pleaded not guilty and is being held without bond. Fred Goldman, the father of Ron Goldman, has filed a creditor's claim against the estate of O.J. Simpson for $117 million. Simpson was acquitted of the murder of Ron Goldman and ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson in 1995. In 1997, a California judge found Simpson liable for their deaths in a civil case and ordered he pay the families nearly $34 million. His attorneys say the claim consists of the balance plus the interest. Beachgoers in Rhode Island got a spooky surprise this weekend. This crazy video shows tens of thousands of dragonflies invading the beach, with people saying it turned the sky pitch black. Experts say it's that time of the year when dragonflies migrate, and these ones are headed south to find a wetter habitat. Today, Apple released its first version of Apple Intelligence to registered developers. The preview includes a new Siri look and upgraded features, AI-generated summaries for mail and messages, and a new text generation service. Later this year, it'll be released to the public with even more features. And Marvel is officially back. This weekend, Deadpool and Wolverine earned a record-shattering $211 million at the domestic box office and $444 million worldwide. It's the largest opening ever for an R-rated movie, stealing the record from the first Deadpool movie. It is also the 6th biggest opening of all time for any film. President Biden on the road in Texas today, his first public remarks since explaining his decision to end his re-election bid. They came at the library of the last sitting president to do the same. He took on 2 hot topics: Supreme Court reform and presidential immunity.
I have great respect for our institutions and the separation of powers laid out in our Constitution. But what's happening now is not consistent with that doctrine of separation of powers. I use the Commission's analysis, and today I'm calling for 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy.
NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist joins us now. Aaron, walk us through the president's proposals. What exactly is he suggesting and why?
Well, Valerie, I think you just played a little bit of the why there. The president says that the work needs to be done to strengthen the guardrails of democracy, and he believes the proposal that he outlined today would help to do that. There are really 3 points to the president's proposal that he laid out here at the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library in Austin today as they were celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The president said that he'd like to see term limits for members of the Supreme Court. He recommended an 18-year term for members of the court, saying that a president would likely get to appoint 2 or nominate 2 people to the Supreme Court through the course of a presidency, and that it would that term would help to reduce the chance of one president radically altering the court for generations. The president also said he'd like to see binding, enforceable code of ethics for members of the Supreme Court, something that is more similar to what we see other federal judges having to deal with right now as it relates to gifts and political activities. And the president also talked about wanting to see a constitutional amendment that would ensure former presidents don't have immunity when it comes to potential federal prosecution for official acts that may have happened while those presidents were in office. That's something, obviously, that has been talked about quite a bit since the Supreme Court made its ruling about presidential immunity in the case of former President Donald Trump. And so these are all things that President Biden says he believes would help to firm up public trust in the Supreme Court and in the presidency as well, Valerie.
Aaron, these are pretty big proposals. What is the likelihood that any of this would pass?
Yeah, this would be a very heavy lift in several different ways. Some of these things would require a constitutional amendment. I'll spare you the civics lesson here, but there are several ways that you can get a constitutional amendment. They are all complex, which is by design, I would imagine. There was one of the president's proposals, the idea of creating a more enforceable code of ethics for Supreme Court justices. That's something that the legislature could do just by passing a law, but it's also something that is not likely to happen because right now we do have a legislature that is divided. We've got Republicans in control of the House, Democrats in control of the Senate, and so getting something like that passed through the legislature right now is highly unlikely. The Speaker of the House, Republican, said that this was something that was dead on arrival, putting out a statement saying that he would not support this, obviously, and it's something that would not happen, would not get through Congress.
Mm-hmm. We know the president only has a couple of months left in office. Do you think this will be the first of a few big proposals we might be seeing from him?
You know, that's a possibility. You're right. There's just about 6 months, maybe a little less than that, left for the Biden presidency. And obviously, this is something that the president has really elevated. As you mentioned, this is the first time we're seeing the president out in a public place since he decided to end his bid for re-election. And this was the issue that he chose to elevate in that moment. And so I think this is something you can expect to hear him talking about more and more over the months to come. As I said, it's not something that's likely to get through Congress in the time that the president has left in office, but potentially this is something that could be a talking point for Democrats and for the vice president. She did endorse this plan. We're told by the White House that she was consulted as the president was coming up with this plan, and so potentially this is something we could see come up throughout the campaign season and potentially something that President Harris could talk about if she were to win in November, Valerie.
Finally, Aaron, President is on his way to Houston, where people there are paying their respects to Representative Sheila Lee Jackson. She recently passed away. What can you tell us about that event?
Yeah, President Biden called the Congresswoman a force. He said she was a towering figure in politics who spoke truth to power. And so he's going to Houston now to pay his respects, really. The former Congresswoman is lying in state at the City Hall in Houston. And President Biden made it a point to add a stop to his trip here so that he could go there to pay his respects, along with several other members of Congress who are traveling with the president. We know that Vice President Harris will be here in Texas. She will go to Houston on Thursday and deliver a eulogy at the closed funeral service for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Valerie?
Okay, Aaron, thank you so much. We appreciate your reporting. Iowa is now the latest state to ban most abortions. The new 6 weeks is in place as of today after a court ruling gave it the green light. NBC senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has the fallout.
A new reality in Iowa. As of today, nearly all abortions now banned, making the Midwest state just the latest to fan the flames of a political fire burning over reproductive rights heading into November. A divided state Supreme Court recently upholding the law that bans abortions in most cases once any fetal cardiac activity is detected, which can be as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy. Governor Kim Reynolds applauding the court for upholding the will of the people. The law includes some limited exceptions, allowing abortions in cases where fetal abnormalities are, quote, incompatible with life, a standard doctors say is less than clear.
Does that mean that an infant after birth would die within hours, within days, within months, or have a shortened life?
Dr. Emily Bavers, the only full-time OBGYN in her rural county, says she worries that laws like this one tie physicians' hands in dangerous ways when medical complications arise.
We know that there are a number of things that can go really wrong. These are all things that are more nuanced than what our legislature can put on paper. There's a lot of kind of psychological dread, I would say, right now.
Iowa now one of at least 4 states banning abortions once any fetal cardiac activity is detected. All this also now front and center on the campaign trail. Vice President Kamala Harris has made abortion access a centerpiece of her platform.
So today, Iowa put in place a Trump abortion ban, which makes Iowa the 22nd state in our country to have a Trump abortion ban.
Now it's up to the will of the people in each state. It's up to the voters.
Back in Iowa, the focus on the future.
I believe we will see more and more providers leaving these areas. It will inevitably lead to more mothers being lost from their families. That's what keeps me up at night.
Laura Jarrett, NBC News.
Coming up, we'll head to Paris for a look at today's Olympic competitions. Here's a live look at the cauldron burning bright. We'll ask our Keir Simmons about a venue that's having serious problems and what it means for the games. But first, you got to see this. A major highway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas turned into a traffic nightmare this weekend. A truck carrying a 75,000-pound container of lithium batteries fell over Friday morning. The container caught fire, shutting the highway down for nearly 2 days. Lithium fires are super dangerous and hard to put out, so crews had to just let it burn. That meant drivers were stuck on the road for hours in over 100-degree heat with no cell service and little food or water. The highway reopened Sunday morning after crews moved the container away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look around the world. In England, 2 children were killed and 9 others injured in a knife attack at a dance event. A 17-year-old suspect has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Police say the investigation is ongoing. In China, at least 15 people were killed in a mudslide in the southeastern Hunan province, triggered by heavy rains from Typhoon Gami. The storm also caused a death in Shanghai when a delivery person was struck by a falling tree. Gami's remnants have wreaked havoc across the region following the deadly impacts in the Philippines and Taiwan. Internet services have been restored in Bangladesh after deadly protests against job quota reform. The demonstrations began in universities and escalated into nationwide unrest, injuring thousands. The Bangladeshi Supreme Court's decision to scrap most quotas has led students to call off the protests. The government says the situation is stabilizing while rights groups continue to criticize the use of force during protests. Thousands of Taylor Swift fans scored free seats in Munich this weekend by packing Olympic Hill for a perfect view of her concerts. As we know all too well, Eras Tour tickets aren't easy to score, but around 25,000 fans gathered on that grassy hill, braving the heat to make their wildest dreams come true. Israel retaliating with new strikes inside Lebanese territory today. It's in response to a rocket strike the IDF claims came from Lebanon. That attack killed a dozen people, among them children on a soccer field. NBC's Raf Sanchez visited the Golan Heights and filed this report.
These escalating tensions began right here on this soccer field in the mountain village of Majd al-Shams. It was a little after 6 p.m. on what was a normal Saturday night. Kids were playing on this soccer field, and then the sirens started blaring, and just a couple of seconds later, that rocket came crashing down right here, killing those 12 children. You can see there is a memorial to them here, all of them aged between 10 and 16 years old. And this rocket brought death and destruction to this community, but it has also put the broader Middle East on edge. The Israeli government says it was the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah who dominates southern Lebanon, who fired the rocket. Hezbollah is denying that. But Israel says they have no doubt and that they will strike back. The Israeli Security Cabinet meeting overnight, authorizing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister to choose the time and the manner of that retaliation. Netanyahu has said it will be on a scale that we have not seen before in these 9.5 months of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Now, the United States is saying it supports Israel's right to defend itself, but it is also urging restraint. It does not want to see an all-out conflict on Israel's northern border at the same time that it is trying to finalize a ceasefire in Gaza. And the tensions here make that diplomatic effort much more complicated. CIA Director Bill Burns was in Rome yesterday. He was meeting with counterparts from Israel, from Qatar, and from Egypt. We expect that there are going to be further talks later on in the week, but at this point, there's no sign of a breakthrough. I will just say a little earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was here at this site. He was visiting this memorial, and there was an angry crowd of locals who gathered, who were protesting, who were shouting, and they made very, very clear they feel that the Prime Minister and the Israeli government did not do enough to protect these children. Back to you.
Okay, Ref Sanchez, thank you. In Venezuela, election results are up in the air as the country's autocratic leader and his challenger are both claiming victory. Incumbent President Nicolas Maduro says he won the election over the weekend by about 7 percentage points, but the other side is saying that's not true and that opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez actually won 70% of the vote. Here's how U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken weighed in earlier today.
We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. The international community is watching this very closely and will respond accordingly.
Let's bring in NBC News correspondent David Noriega with the latest. David, Maduro's opponents really want to challenge those results. What happens now?
Well, Valerie, the big question now is, will the government allow access to the paper tallies, the official paper tallies produced by the voting machines across the country? So far, they are refusing access to those and claiming that Maduro won the election by about 51% to Gonzalez's 44%. The opposition said that it has gotten its hands on enough of those paper tallies to be able to prove statistically that Gonzalez actually won about 70% of the vote, winning in a landslide. This situation, it can't really continue in this way. Something has to give. The big question of what will give, whether the opposition will give or the government of Maduro will give, depends on a lot of factors. How big these protests that we're starting to see become, how much pressure Maduro comes under from international actors. I think particularly some countries in the region like Colombia and Brazil, which have left-wing governments that are not exactly allies of Maduro, but have friendly diplomatic relations with Maduro. They could put some pressure on the government. Whether the government fractures and the military stays behind Maduro, these are the big questions to look for moving forward, particularly how big and how violent those protests that you just saw a bit of on your screen, how those evolve moving forward.
Yeah, we've been seeing those images of those protests throughout the day. We just saw some there. Given what we know about Maduro and the government in Venezuela in general, will those protests have any sort of impact?
Look, this is not the first time this happens in Venezuela in recent years. There have been other disputed elections. There have been other waves of protests, but several things are different this time. It's the first time that the opposition has coalesced around a single candidate and actually actively and fully participated in elections rather than boycotting them. The entire region, including the United States, is facing the consequences of a massive out-migration from Venezuela, one of the biggest mass migrations in recent history. We have situations where a lot of these protests are happening in what used to be bastions of support for the government in largely poor and working class neighborhoods. If that continues moving in that direction, then it is possible that enough things have changed just in terms of the conditions that we're seeing on the ground for this to actually put enough pressure on Maduro to let go of power, something he's refused to do for many years. Now, the last thing I'll say, Valerie, is that Maduro is actually under indictment in the United States by the federal government for drug trafficking and corruption. A lot of people, observers, experts, people in Venezuela, think that it's highly unlikely that Maduro will leave power peacefully being the key word here, unless there's some kind of deal that allows him to ensure that he won't just wind up in an American prison. Valerie?
And David, talk to us about why the world should be paying attention to this, and not just the surrounding countries, but here in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, well, the main reason is that migrant crisis that I mentioned. 7.7 is kind of the latest number. Million Venezuelans have left in the time since Maduro has been in power. That's about 20% of the population. The vast majority of them are in surrounding countries in Latin America, but about 10% of that number, some 720,000 or so, have crossed the southern border into the United States in the last 5 years. The Venezuelan economic crisis has become a hemispheric crisis for all of the Americas. That is only one, but probably the top reason why we should all be paying attention to this and why we should all care.
Okay, David Noriega, thank you for that reporting. Now to Paris, as we check in with how the U.S. is doing so far at the Olympics. Over the weekend, Americans won a total of 12 medals, including gold medals for both swimming and fencing. But after a rainy opening ceremony, officials are raising red flags over the water quality in the River Seine. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons tells us more.
Hey there, well, another eventful day here in Paris with the men's Team USA gymnastics team achieving a bronze medal, the first medal since 2008, China and Japan getting gold and silver. But the celebrations were off the charts. Both the spectators and Team USA themselves, the camaraderie was amazing, celebrating that gold medal after so much attention on the women's gymnastics, correctly so, with Simone Biles putting in such an incredible performance this week. A little bit of glory for the men. Meanwhile, Djokovic beating Nadal in straight sets today at Roland Garros, moving past the second round. He is hoping that he will add a gold medal to his enormous number of Grand Slams. So that story is developing well here. More concerns, though, and this is nail-biting stuff for Paris, over whether or not the triathlon will really be able to happen in the Seine. As advertised, the plan had been that there would be swimming in the Seine as part of the triathlon and other events. Today, there was just too much bacteria in the water after those rains that we saw at the opening ceremony. They say they will test the water again overnight, make a decision in the early hours of the morning. They could still delay it and hold it. They do believe that the weather at some point will allow them to see those E. coli levels down low enough for the swimming to take place, but it's a bit of a worry. It's what happens when the city is the venue. It's spectacular, it's also challenging.
All right, Keir Simmons, thank you. Still ahead this hour, a potential game changer in colon cancer detection. Details on the new test that could lead to more people being diagnosed. We'll explain why that's not a bad thing. Welcome back. Here are some of the stories happening out west that we're following. A 72-year-old woman and two 4-year-old boys are dead and 2 more people injured after a pontoon boat capsized on Lake Powell in Arizona. Officials say the boat was being towed when it overturned Friday. The cause of the incident is still being investigated. Mandatory evacuations have been ordered for a wildfire west of Loveland, Colorado. Officials are calling it the Alexander Mountain Fire and say it's burning up to 247 acres and counting, partly in the Roosevelt National Forest. San Francisco health officials are advising residents to wear masks in crowded indoor spaces amid a rising COVID-19 wave. According to the California Department of Public Health, COVID accounts for nearly 2% of deaths in California, up slightly from the week before. Now to a potential breakthrough in the fight against colon cancer. Today, the Food and Drug Administration approved a new blood test that can detect it. Colon or rectal cancer affects over 150,000 Americans each year and is the second leading cause of cancer deaths in the country. It's also been affecting younger people under the age of 50 at growing rates. Let's bring in NBC News medical fellow Dr. Akshay Syal. Dr. Syal, this test isn't new, right? It was already available to doctors as a screening tool. So does this FDA approval just help ensure its safety? Why does all this matter?
So it's a great question, Valerie. Good evening. So this test, now that today it got FDA approval, essentially what this tells, doctors around the country is a sort of seal of approval that this test, did meet the FDA's very, very high bar for screening. So this, you're right, it was available before, but I don't personally know too many people who are using it because A, it was expensive, and B, because we weren't really sure how exactly to use this. So Valerie, with today's approval, the other thing that's important is insurance coverage. Medicare has announced that they're going to be covering a significant portion of this. We expect, commercial insurances to do the same. So the FDA approval, pretty significant in this case today, Valerie.
So talk to us about how this test actually works and how effective is it supposed to be?
So the test actually picks up on little pieces of DNA. So essentially what happens, Valerie, is you have, if you have colon cancer, it can shed pieces of DNA from the colon into the blood. Some people may have heard the word liquid biopsy, and you can see here on your screen, about 83% effective in terms of identifying those colon cancers in stage 1, 2, and 3. But here's the big thing, Valerie. See that 13%? That's about earlier stage polyps. I think most of us watching this know somebody who may have had, polyps removed in a colonoscopy or told they're precancerous. It's important to note this blood test doesn't pick up on those as well. So, that's a really important caveat here when we're talking about this study. And just of note, Valerie, I will say if this blood test is positive, you do still ultimately have to get a colonoscopy to confirm the diagnosis.
All right, yeah, Dr. Syal, that was going to be our next question. We've heard people complain about getting a colonoscopy. Does it mean those days are coming to an end?
Unfortunately not. The colonoscopy really is the gold standard, especially because it picks up polyps about 95% compared to that 13% number you saw just a minute ago. So I think, for all those out there who are worried it's uncomfortable, it really is life-saving. Colon cancer is, to an extent, a preventable disease. So I urge you to get screened one way or the other if you haven't already, Valerie.
Dr. Akshay Syal with that important report. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Before we go, it's time for the future of everything. Elon Musk under fire tonight. Why? Well, that's the future of AI and politics, how he may have violated the policies of his own social media platform. Plus, we head back to Paris. Our Gadi Schwartz is taking a stab at the art of fencing. How sharp are his skills? You'll just have to stay tuned to find out. Elon Musk is under fire tonight after sharing a fake campaign ad of Kamala Harris on X. The ad has an AI-generated voiceover. It sounds like Harris is calling Biden senile and herself an incompetent presidential candidate. The video doesn't stop there either. Musk has endorsed Donald Trump for president. He later clarified online that the video was satire, but neither X nor Musk have responded to NBC News' requests for comment. Let's bring in NBC's Yasmin Vesuvian to break it down for us. Yasmin, what do we know about the origin of this video, where it came from, and what is X's policy about sharing content like this?
All right, so you talked about it, right? What was actually in the video? It was AI generated, right? As you mentioned, the vice president of the United States in this kind of quote unquote campaign video. Again, this was a deep fake saying President Joe Biden was senile, calling herself a DEI hire. The origin of this video was from YouTube. It was actually on YouTube and put as a parody video, put up by an account called Mr. Reagan. Then Elon Musk on Friday retweeted that video on X and did not, in fact, classify it as a parody, despite the fact that it was originally classified as a parody. Now, the huge problem with this is, despite the fact that we now look at X versus what Twitter once was and oftentimes see a lot of misinformation, this actually retweet may very well have violated X's policy. And let me read for you, quote unquote, what the policy actually says here, and then you can decide for yourself. You may not show synthetic, manipulated, or out of context media that may deceive or confuse people and lead to harm. Quote unquote, misleading media. In addition, we may label posts containing misleading media to help people understand their authenticity and to provide additional context. So Elon Musk's his defense here essentially is saying that parody is not a crime, right? That's why he says he was able to kind of retweet this initial deep fake. Kamala Harris's campaign putting out a statement as well saying this: we believe the American people want the real freedom, opportunity, and security the vice president is offering, not the fake, manipulated lies of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And just to remind folks, as I'm sure many people know at this point, when the initial attempted assassination happened of the former president of the United States, directly after that, Elon Musk, in fact, endorsed Donald Trump for president of the United States. Valerie.
Yasmin, we know videos like this, there's more of them out there. This is not going to be the last one that we see in regards to the election.
No.
Concerns about misinformation and how it spreads have been a big issue for years, even before this sort of AI boom that we're in the middle of. What worries do incidents like this raise about what else is out there on social media?
It's interesting that this is happening now, right? Because just a couple of hours ago, news broke from the FCC and what they're planning on doing, proposing this kind of, and I want to read it for you so I get it right, the first of its kind rule to mandate disclosure of AI-generated content in political ads, though it may, by the way, not go into effect in time, essentially before the election. And you remember, Valerie, just a couple of months ago, there was the deep fake AI-generated robocall of President Biden at the time during the New Hampshire primary, in which President Biden, quote unquote, President Biden, by the way, again, a deep fake, and I can't restate this enough, saying don't turn out to vote for the New Hampshire primary. And that was also AI-generated, but dating all the way back to before AI even came to fruition. I mean, you think about the testimony from Mark Zuckerberg and the misinformation put out by Facebook in the 2020 election and the 2016 election. As well, the discussions that we had surrounding ISIS and the hate speech that was put out from terrorist organizations like ISIS, and whether or not Twitter, in fact, should allow propaganda from organizations like that, from a terrorist organization like ISIS. This has been an ongoing conversation, and there really is no precedent for it. But as technology becomes more sophisticated and they begin to use it more in political ads, as we're seeing now, and not identifying them, for instance, as deep fakes, is when it becomes really problematic, especially in the day and age in which we have situations like after the 2020 election, in which you had the former president of the United States saying, in fact, the election was stolen, when that was not true. Valerie.
Yep, Yasmin, I think this is an issue we will continue to talk about right up until November. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Finally, tonight, the person usually sitting in this seat, our very own Gadi Schwartz, is in Paris. So what is he doing there? Well, tonight, the answer, he is trying his hand at one of Olympics' most historic sports, fencing.
So beyond some very ornate Parisian gates, next to the tomb of Napoleon, in this fortress that is a museum dedicated to the weapons of war,
swords paint a bold and bloody history from when scores were settled with a duel. During King Louis's reign, historians estimate that several thousand people fought to the death every year in sword fights. Those duels led to fencing, a sport steeped in centuries of tradition, and as recognizable today as it was when the modern Olympics began.
Lee Kiefer, an American fencing first.
Here's the craziest part. The last duel to be fought in France was 1967. Not 1867, 1967.
That duel was between a member of parliament and the mayor of Marseille, and fortunately both men survived, just like my opponent here.
Ha! Cool, but now I kind of want to do the real thing.
So for a quick crash course, we headed to one of the biggest fencing schools in Paris.
Spread your feet. Yes, bend your legs.
Okay.
Why do you do old man? Yes, like
Why
this.
do I do an old man?
Yeah.
41.
41 is young guy. Mask on and you're ready.
Mask on.
Okay. Extension. Okay. Lunge. Okay.
Man, this thing's heavy already.
Before I could get any more worn out, we decided it was time to test my mettle.
Maël, please come in.
This isn't 15-year-old. This is like a French warrior. All right, D'Artagnan.
Allez. Halt. Good.
Oh, my gosh. That is a lot harder than it looks.
I'll give you some advice.
Okay.
I need you to do more lunges. Let's go.
More lunges.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Good. Have deep breaths. Okay? En garde. End of the match, shake hands.
Thanks for taking it easy on me. Oh, man.
Sorry, Gadi.
Olympics 2028. I'll be 46. You'll be 19. Yeah, rematch. Rematch in Los Angeles. Perfect.
Yeah, do more lunges before that rematch, Gadi. That does it for us tonight. I'm Valerie Castro. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.